Hello and welcome. I'm Coach Luca. This is the Reflective Coach Podcast, and this is episode 1. Episode 1: Considerations for creating a player-focused environment. Within this podcast and this episode, I'm going to explore considerations and ask many key questions, allowing you and us as coaches to highlight many areas in terms of our session planning, reflections for the future, and how we go about planning sessions. I highlight my experience, areas that I would consider, how I plan sessions, and just giving a bit of insight of how to improve the quality and planning of sessions to fully impact the player as well as to have a great coaching session. Despite that in mind, when we talk about a great coaching session, not every session is going to be great. As I reflect on one this week, or ones in the past, I may look at different sessions, or I may look at the same session that I've delivered across multiple groups, and not every session is going to be perfect. It's not going to impact every player, and it's not going to be purposeful to every player. Although we have planned it to be purposeful, impact players, and have created many key challenges to further progress every player, there are some players who just won't take the exercises, and we need to ask questions why. We have to be reflective and understanding as to how and why that didn't impact them, and whether this makes an impact on the future within our delivery or planning, or whether we provide the right coaching intervention or support, giving key feedback to a player in a session to further impact them. Can we plan a session around them to fully impact them if it hasn't impacted them? Or do we continue to plan sessions and plan in transitions and feedback, utilising the coaching process to fully engage that player during the session? Can we use peers to engage them or overcome issues? Can we create a buddy up system or give demonstrations? Can we utilise an assistant coach to support that player or take them within a smaller group so they can get through to them? Utilising the assistant coach is very important, and further along in this episode I'm going to look at and speak about the assistant coach and how we can utilise them within the session. But for me, I want to look at the considerations for creating a player-focused environment. First and foremost, when I look at an environment or I plan a session, the environment has to be friendly, welcoming, open, and a space that is safe, nurturing, and that is going to be challenging to each player. Although we can have players of different player profiles, of which we can have players who want to be the very best and the top of their game and have that Roy Keane mindset where every session has to be the highest quality or they're going to push themselves. Or we have the players who are just happy to be there, where they're going to learn and where they're there for fun. Or whether we just have players who just want to come to football for fun, to have a kick about with their mates and to be part of a team. We have to be fully aware and consider each and every player that we have and how we meet the needs of each of these players. We have to be inclusive of all of these player profiles, and even those who are there just for fun, even though they may not know or realise, we can ensure their learning through many blended guided learning exercises, and we can instill this within sessions, allowing them to learn along the process. Even if they're there just for fun, we can provide learning, outcomes, support, feedback, mechanisms that allow them to continue to learn, providing them with the opportunities. Even if for now, at their young age, they're just looking at the game for fun, they can take away much understanding and have many learning outcomes which will allow them to make the option or decision to remain in the game at an older age. For me, each and every environment has to look at the longer term picture. We're having an impact on these children's lives, even for now, especially at a young age. We want every young player to have the opportunity of becoming lifelong participants of the game. And that's about us ensuring and instilling the highest standards, providing them with the platform, environment and opportunities which will allow them to make their own life choices, whether to remain a lifelong participant at their own mindset and choice. If we're able to do this and provide it at a young age, even if they don't stay with us as players, whether through our club or team, they have the opportunity to do so and look back on their time with fondness. They can also consider and understand the fact that we've supported them in their coaching journey or their player journey whilst we're on our coaching journey, which has enabled them to have the opportunities in the future, of which has allowed them to stay in the game. We're looking at what we want to consider in this player environment and how we further them. So the first big question I would ask in the planning of each session is what the key objectives are, and the biggest coaching consideration is consider what football is to a child and how the game looks like to them. If they're coming into a session and they're seeing lots of cones, poles, a session that is looking more drilled, that has lots of different equipment planned out, that is going to look at more fitness, or looks too much like fitness, or less ball contact time, less game. For those who are there just for fun, they can have fun at times through the different multiple exercises that we have planned maybe. But if we're delivering sessions like this all the time, especially for a young age or for any new player that comes through our door, this isn't what the game of football looks like to them. And this could hamper them coming back or wanting to learn. Or if they're not enjoying the session, then and we continue to deliver it, then it's not fully impacting each player. So for example, when I see a coach setting up exercises and drills for an under-9s team, and they're primarily focusing on fitness without the ball contact, for me this is going against the natural fitness elements that we can instill in young players and get them to enjoy football, enabling their ball contact and rolling time, improving the amount of touches and technical ability in the process as they develop that natural fitness. So for me, I always like to look at fitness with the ball, and I like to try and disguise it through whether it's ball mastery, a quick warm-up, through a game, whether I'm going into a quick game of knockouts, which players know and understand and play and score regularly. So for example, if we can relate the school environment into our learning and coaching environment, players, for them, this is what the game looks like. So they're coming from school knowing that they can play World Cup and understand games like knockouts and World Cup, and that they can come into a coaching environment or training environment that we have created for them away from school. This is what the game of football looks like for them. You'll have players who from a young age will watch every game, or you'll have players who will never watch any game and they'll lack that general knowledge. So for those who watch the game, football for them may look like the highest standards, wanting to be the best, wanting to have the ball all the time, may want to do those skills depending on who their role models are. And some who are understanding can look at how their team plays and know the fact that their team plays as a team, and that's what they want to do, and that's why they're there at training. For those who don't watch the game, a game of football is football, scoring goals. How do they do that? And that's the question that we need to ask. First and foremost, any player who wants to come into training always wants to score goals. Even if you're a goalkeeper and you're running around with your pals and the team at the start of training before the sessions even started, you're trying to score goals whilst you can. Especially as a goalkeeper when you're very limited and the whole objective is to keep the ball out of the back of the net. So if you have an opportunity as a goalkeeper to score goals, and this is going to make you happy knowing that you're going to be scoring goals before the session even started, then you're going to be very happy with the fact that you've had the opportunity to score. So if we're looking at this from a player perspective, and that we want to support each player, even just on their playing position such as a goalkeeper, and that we have to be mindful of the fact that they're not going to get many touches in the session if they're the goalkeeper, or the fact that they're not going to get as much natural fitness because they're not moving around as much, or the fact that they're limited by scoring goals. So could this affect their morale, their psychology, their understanding, the way they move the ball, or their technical ability within the short and long term? Are we limiting them just to be a goalkeeper? Or can we find a balance to engage them in playing outfield and then to transition as a goalkeeper at the right time? Providing them with that balance of infield and outfield, as well as giving them the opportunity whether they want to continue as a goalkeeper, or if a goalkeeper doesn't work out for them, can they adapt back into position as an outfield player? Even when in a game, if you have multiple goalkeepers in the squad, or you find yourself with an opportunity to play your goalkeeper out, or you may be shorter players and need to play the goalkeeper out, then you need to be mindful of the fact that the outfield positioning and opportunities for the goalkeeper must be instilled within a training session. A goalkeeper is aware of when to catch the ball, to come out of the box, to save, and primarily stop any ball going in the back of their net. Even though some goalkeepers may lack the understanding of coming out, rushing up, being one-on-one, how they can be beaten, the main aspect or the main consideration or main component for any goalkeeper that they're going to be aware of is not to let that ball in the back of the net. So if they're not letting that ball in the back of the net, and then we're limiting them to just being a goalkeeper, then we're hampering their player opportunities, and we're even at times holding them back from growing with the squad around them. They're not going to have the same opportunities outfield. They're not going to understand their pitch geography. They're not going to understand when to adapt or how. They're not going to understand their ball releasing skills as quickly. So this is everything that we can look at within the session itself. We need to create that balance, allowing the players to have that opportunity to go in and out, as well as to master any and all positions that they want to. I've worked with many players, especially within an academy system, who at the age of 14, 15 are trying to push for a scholarship, but they find themselves within a development centre or shadow squad, and they're asking questions as to why they've never been in the academy. At times this has been to the fact that there is a limit on positions within the academy, and the fact that this player is limited to playing in their one position, such as a midfielder. This is one of the reasons that they've lacked the opportunity to move into the academy setting. For a player who's adaptable and should have the opportunity, if they went into the academy and there was too many players playing in one position, they should be able to adapt in another position. So for example, from centre mid to right back, they should be able to adapt and understand how they would need to play right back if they were pushed there, because there were too many players playing in that centre midfield role. We have to provide every player with that opportunity to play multiple roles and have the opportunity to develop their technical ability in and out of field. This way they can have many opportunities away from the club or away from our environment that we've been able to provide them with, or that they can make their own choice as to whether what position fits for them. Every player has their own need, and we must consider each and every player and their personality. What are their wants and needs? What does the game look like to them? How do we impact each of them? How do they respond to different coaches? How do they respond to each exercise? How do they respond to an SSG? If we set up exercises which are primarily focused on ball work or looking at technical ability itself, then are they happy with that? Have they responded? Have their heads dropped, or are they going to try and push themselves? Can we find that right balance, or can we provide the right intervention, connection or communication to engage each and every player? Can we overcome their negative mindset if their heads have dropped? Can we push them if they have a positive mindset and knowing that they want to be the very best and the highest technical ability player within the team? There's much for us to consider as coaches, and there's a lot that goes into planning. I speak from a lot of experience, having planned a lot of sessions, especially in different environments, from grassroots at young players to TOTS or the highest quality academy players. So I've been able to provide a wide variety of coaching sessions over the years. What may work with a high technical quality group or technical selection of players may not work with a lesser technical session of players, even if we took out some of the coaching transitions or coaching interventions. And vice versa, if you plan a session for a lesser technical able group and you provide more interventions or progressions within a session for a higher able group, they may not respond to it, or it may not impact them as fully as we'd expect or that we planned for. So there are many questions that I'd like to look for, and although I'm only 13 minutes within this first episode, and there's many questions that I've asked and provided much food for thought, there are so many questions that I would highlight and plan within my session. So for example, as I continue to look in, how are we challenging players? And this is what I've considered earlier on within this episode already. Are we challenging players enough that they want to come back next week? Are we challenging them enough that they want to go home and practice even more, ready for next week? Are we challenging them enough that they're understanding or asking more questions, or that they want to come and engage with the coach, or that they're trying to push the group around them? But that's one of the key questions. How are we going to challenge players? And that interlinks with how are we going to progress the session? What progressions are in place for us to maximise our coaching contact time with them, to progress the session, allowing those who want to push themselves to enjoy it? Or how do we progress it into a small-sided game for those who are not as technical and those who don't have that enjoyment of the technical work, knowing that there's an SSG or small-sided game coming at the end, knowing that we're going to fully engage them and that they're going to enjoy that part of the session. That part of the session may be the most impactful part, and that way we may overcome their negative mindset and we may be able to get through to them, or we may be able to connect with them even more within the SSG, because that's what the game looks like to them, or that's what they enjoy the most. So how are we going to progress the session? What timings are we looking at? How have we structured the session? How much time we spent on one thing compared to another? Have we planned in any time to engage with players or give them feedback? Have we planned for time within quick transitions? Have we planned for time in case players turn up late or we need to extend on the technical part of the session, reducing the amount of time on the SSG? Have we planned out the session enough, knowing that the session is going to last the full duration, or that there are enough progressions to progress for the duration? Or if the exercise has been completed quicker because of the high quality of player that's available, or the fact that they've understood it and they've completed our session to the standards, expectations, and understood the objectives within the process, that we could spend more time on an SSG because they progressed on one part of the session, or they've mastered it to the expectations that we have. Are the challenges stimulating enough for every player? So as I've highlighted, if the player isn't challenged and they're a player who comes in wanting to be the very best, what I call the Roy Keanes of the session, then have we stimulated their learning? Have we stimulated challenges to further push them and to make them feel as if every session was impactful to them? Along the way, we may lose players because they may feel that there's better coaching available elsewhere, or that they may feel that a club has higher standards because it's winning all the time in terms of grassroots leagues. Or we may lose players because their friends are at other clubs. Or we may lose players because they don't feel that they've been progressed or challenged enough at grassroots. And whether this comes from a player perspective or their own choice, we may find parents are involved within this decision making over a period of time, and this could impact us along the way. We have such an emotional connection with each of these players, and we're spending time with them, especially within our own capacity and commitments, to give up time to impact them, especially just in the planning stage and thinking about training within the week and after training. So it's going to be hard along the way, and it's not an easy journey. I've been there myself, and I've unfortunately lost players that I've loved and spent much time wanting to grow and develop, because either their paths have led them another way, or the fact that over time their parents have decided that the club is no longer for them. And you're going to find this, especially at grassroots football, or you may find this within an academy setting where parents and their players are always just trying to strive for the best. So whether you're a cat-free academy and you have a player who's in the academy and they're at the top of their game, a parent and player may push for a higher cat club because they may feel that there's bigger opportunities for them elsewhere in their pursuit of their dream. But as I speak, in most of my experience and reflect on or upon my time in coaching, I'll talk mostly from the basis of grassroots football, what I've learned and how I can further impact players. And I want to provide the opportunities, understanding, engagement, ideas and feedback, allowing you as coaches to take all these questions into your pathway within the grassroots game. Are the challenges too challenging for the less able players? So if we plan progressions and challenges to further push all of our players, are they too challenging for the lesser able? Have we planned something in place for the lesser able? So for example, could we split the group up and utilise the assistant coach? How can the assistant coach dim down what you're doing and then progress the players who are lesser technical to further progress whilst we challenge the players in the more able group? Now, we're being inclusive of all their needs, and although we've split the group which may not seem inclusive to some, we're creating an environment which is meeting the needs of both players. So we want to challenge those who want the challenges and can be pushed, and we want to support those and nurture those to then challenge them in a group and environment that is going to be beneficial to them. We also want to find that right balance and mix it up so the lesser technical players are working alongside the higher able players, so the higher able players will be able to become role models within the process and demonstrate their qualities and their skill set to the players around them. You also create and bridge that gap between the lesser technical and more able players and create a more inclusive and harmonious environment around you. It also creates more harmony between the squad and creates more harmony within training itself by blending and balancing the group as best as possible. But we also want to ensure that every session and every time we have contact with the player, that we're supportive and impacting them. At times, having lesser technical players with the more able and more talented players or more technical players can be too demanding or off-putting, especially for a player who's just walked through the door and they want to be here to learn, to just have fun, to start their player pathway, to start their journey. If they're with players who are too technical, this may deter them and prevent them from coming back because they felt that the session was too demanding for them and that they've walked away. Within your coaching philosophy, your outlook and the way you manage your squad, this could be dependent, especially at grassroots football, remember, as to what you want in your squad. As to whether you're a coach who wants the highest standards, only the best players, and the fact that you're not going to include any player that doesn't meet that certain standard, or whether you're a coach who's inclusive of everyone and want to create a squad of whoever walks in the door is part of your squad. You have to find that right balance, because you're going to get great players along the way who are naturally great and they may not realise it. You may get naturally good players who are very good and realise it. Or you may get players who are the very best within your squad, and players who are not so technical and may never develop that technical ability because they're not as committed, they're not striving as much, or the fact that playing football a couple of times a week is enough for them compared to those who want to play football for 6 or 7 times a week, play for their school, play for an academy, who want to be the best. So if you're inclusive of a squad like that and you want to maintain the squad stays together, it's how you understand each and every player and understand the difference between lesser technical and more technical players, and create the right balance, ensuring that you keep all the players in your squad and that you're impacting the lives of as many players as you want. How is the environment inclusive to support the needs of all children and young players? Well, I believe I've just met that question in what I've just discussed and explained. But that also interlinks with, are the challenges too challenging for the lesser able players? So there are 2 key questions there which interlink, but they both separate categorization and understanding for you in your session planning of how you can further impact each player. Have we considered our coaching position and stance? Are we going to stand on the side and observe players? Are we going to be away from players so that we can watch them, or are we too far away that they can't ask us questions or hear us? Are we right in the middle of a session giving feedback? If we're stood in the middle of a session, are we able to observe the entire group with their technical ability or progressions? Or are we stood in the middle of the pitch trying to highlight something specific and look at what we're set out to achieve within standing in the middle of the pitch? When giving feedback, are we standing over the group of players and overpowering them with information and feedback? Are we talking too directly at them? Are we giving them too much information that they're not understanding, or that they've not digested the information to take on board or take back? If we're giving too much information, players will either switch off, they won't understand what you're on about, or they'll try to overload too much and this could overpower their thinking process, especially from a younger age, leading them to be confused or not understanding what you wanted them to understand. At times you need to just look around at the group when you're giving feedback and know when you need to stop talking, and you need to know when a player is switched off or they've not understood. There's only so much a player can understand and take on board, and there's only so much which they're going to capture and retain. Once I was watching a warm-up take place in very cold conditions during January, February a couple of years ago, where the coach blitzed his players for about 15 minutes in a warm-up, getting them running laps around the pitch, getting them passing, and lots of running after their laps. Once he had done all of this, he then stood the group there for 15 minutes, which I timed. He stood them there for 15 minutes and then just spoke at them. After that time, I asked what was the purpose of the warm-up, and then I determined that the fact that the warm-up was a complete waste of time because they've just stood there going cold. How much information he's delivered and in what context, and how much the players have actually taken away from that 15-minute period. And if you're asking yourself how much information a player is taken away in the feedback or that environment, and they're only able to retain or relate so much back to you, then it's quite clear that you're speaking at a player too long if they can't relay everything back to you. You also need to be mindful of the age of players and what they're able to understand or capture, or what they will capture in what you say. Some players may pick out only certain parts. Some players may forget the rest of everything and only pick up the part that was beneficial or understanding to them or what they understood. So we have to be mindful of the fact of our coaching position, coaching stance, coaching communication. This leads me on to another point, our coaching terminology. So as I refer to an SSG, at times I forget there's players who don't understand what SSG means. For me, this is part of my terminology and something that I've used over the years naturally. And when I say SSG, this means small-sided game. So always a game within a session. Games for me are part of my philosophy and my coaching style. And I always like to try and instill ball rolling time, ball contact, lots of different challenges, lots of physical opportunities, chances to score goals, chances playing different positions, quick decision making, fast-paced football, lots of learning. Can we then apply it to 11v11? Is this the only playing time or game that the players have experienced all week? But SSG, some players look at me and like, what's SSG? Well, first and foremost, it's a game. But if we're using coaching terminology that isn't so apparent or isn't so meaningful to a player, or that they're questioning whether they understand this. If we're not mindful of our coaching terminology, then a player will just go home confused or not understand what you've stood. They will not understand what you've said, and that you haven't fully impacted them within within the coaching terminology that we've used. Have we considered ball rolling time? So for me, I'd like to try and get minimum 80% ball rolling time within a session. I like to get players arriving with 1-2 passing, lots of touches, talking to each other, a rival activity that is stimulating and challenging already, that they're going to partner up or work within a small group. There could be an opportunity to progress straight into a rondo, or that we're challenging players in 1-2s to take one touch, to progress to one touch passing, or we're challenging them to take 2 touches, or we're challenging them to use their weaker foot. There is plenty on an arrival activity start challenges and to create that stimulative learning as soon as they arrive. But if they're arriving, they're getting those ball touches. For me, I can't stand players come straight into a session which looks disorganised, or that they're creating a disorganised environment because they're running round and just shooting the ball. They're then losing too much energy too quickly. There isn't many challenges. They're not being progressed. It's not organised. It's not focused. And it can hamper the session as you want to progress players straight in to the warm-up. An arrival activity of 1-2 passing gets lots of touches, is focused, it just allows players to talk to each other, and you can highlight what players are up for the session and what players are not. You can also look at what players need to improve on their passing ability, their communication leadership, their own organisation, whether they've needed to problem solve just by doing an arrival activity such as passing. But I like to try and get an arrival activity as passing, which players know is the expectation, or if we're on 3G within the cold, or AstroTurf in the winter, then I like to get players developing their kick-ups and improving how many they can do. This is a fun activity and fun arrival. This sets many challenges for players each week, sets challenges between the group, and it allows for them to develop their technical ability, as well as getting that full-on contact with the ball, and that their ball is their ball for that warm-up and that for that arrival activity just by doing kick-ups. I like to then progress straight into a warm-up, and I like to use the ball as much as possible. So whether it's a case of playing bulldogs, stuck in the mud, king of the ring, foxes and tails, then there's plenty to do with the ball and how we incorporate the ball. It's a great warm-up. It progresses straight from an arrival activity. It provides natural fitness. It creates that competition between teams and individuals. It creates a stimulated learning environment. And if we've done that just between the arrival activity and warm-up, then we should be able to transition straight into the technical part of our session straight away, or progress straight into a game, then back to a technical, straight into a game. But for me, there's lots of touches immediately at the start of the session. And if they're having 1-2 passes, for those who may struggle in the technical part or game and have less touches, by doing a 1-2 at the start of the session, not only allows them to develop relationships with other teammates they may not have existing relationships with or spend much time with, as well as the fact that they're able to get more touches and improve their passing at the start of the session, which may be supportive of the fact that they may have less touches during the game. So there's lots to consider just by a player arriving at the start of the session. For me, having an arrival activity helps the session be organised. It allows players to get talking and allows them to be organised within themselves as a small group and in pairs, even allowing you to utilise that time to set up or change your session just before you're about to start the warm-up, which I can find beneficial at times, or to catch up with players, or to have that quick conversation with other coaches as they arrive. So an arrival activity for me is always key and always beneficial, and that is something I'd always look at. Have we considered our tone of voice? So are we shouting at players? And at times, do we need to shout at players? Are we talking down low to them? Are we talking in a calm manner? Are we talking too fast? Are we condescending, or are we allowing them to ask questions? For me, there's another podcast episode which I'm going to talk about, which is going to look at questioning and how we build on questioning, which for me is very important to allow players to engage within that communication, to understand and ask questions, to develop their relationship with the coach and take away much information, and just to further push the understanding within a session right throughout and questioning techniques for me is very key, and something that I like to consider in each of every one of my sessions. So for example, if you're doing feedback at the end of the session, especially with a young group, let's say under 10s, and you say, right, what have you learned today? And they'll come out with passing. Some coaches might go, yeah, passing, tackling, okay, that's great. But for me, okay, what have we learned in passing? So if they've said passing, what have we learned in passing? I might take 3 touches. Okay, and if you're taking 3 touches, how many touches do you think we should take? 2? Okay, 2's good. Why would we use 2 touches? Well, 1 to receive, 1 to pass. Okay, yeah, that sounds good. And can we progress from 2 touches to 1? Yeah, I think so. Do we think so-and-so over there is able to do so? Yeah. So do you think you're able to do that in the future? Yeah. Okay, how do you think you can do this? So for me, just on that little conversation and that feedback from player, I've been able to ask him 7 or 8 questions, evolve his thinking, evolve his understanding, and provide many takeaway messages for him to go away and think about of how he could improve on his passing and technical next week. So if he's coming into an arrival activity already, I've built on the transition from the end of the session straight into next week's session on the arrival activity, as well as giving him some information and bases to go away to think about. So even if a player hasn't understood our feedback throughout, or they haven't taken much away from themselves, that if you're having that conversation, you're providing questioning, this allows the player themselves to go away with some takeaway messages, or to go away questioning what you've just asked them, or them to go and find out solutions to the problems which you may have highlighted within the questioning techniques. It also allows players stood there observing and listening to ask many questions themselves and to think about things in their own mind. I like Q&A within sessions myself when delivered with other coaches and players, because as one player asks a question, I may stand there and take bits of it away, and then I may build on my own questions to ask, and then it creates that more harmonious learning environment, which is creative, full of questions, which pushes and stimulates understanding and learning, and that approach to learning, and it wants players to learn more. Have we considered what we want to get out of the session and why? So is the session this week going to be based entirely on fun because we lost on the weekend? Or is the session going to be fully based on exercises and focusing on everything that went wrong on the weekend? Is it going to be pushing players? Is it going to be challenging them to the highest standards? Are we getting that right balance between when we've lost and knowing that we need to regroup and have fun, or when we really need to highlight what went wrong and prepare for the week ahead? Of course, it depends on your own environment in terms of what club you're at, what team, what kind of players you have. But I think even regardless of whether you're with a seniors team or whether you're with an under-6s team, obviously under-6s should be all about fun. And you're not going to recap on the losses too much because the loss has come and gone and you're not winning leagues at the age of 6. But if you can ask questions of what went wrong on a weekend, maybe how and why, allow players to understand what positions they should have been in or could have been in, or what areas of the pitch they could have covered, or how that pass could have improved. For a young age, yeah, that's great. But even from under 6s to seniors, you need to get that balance right of when you're having a full technical session and how to progress those players, especially at a young age, because you want that ball mastery, that contact time, you want to develop them technically quicker. But you want to make sure that balance of fun is right, especially at seniors, which is important, because seniors obviously have different personalities. They can have, which of course is apparent at a young age, but at seniors, players are making the choice to be there. They're giving up their own time. Yeah, you may do as a kid, but as a senior, you're driving yourself to and from training and games. You may have paid your own subs. You're there at a club because you want to win the league. Or you're playing because you didn't have the chances as a child and now this is everything to you as a senior. Or that performance edge of wanting to win leagues is absolutely everything. But you need to get that balance right of when to regroup and have fun, which is very important. So what you want to get out of a session, how and why, is very important to consider of what kind of session that you're going to plan in the week and what session you're going to deliver. Have we considered how to make the session fun? And are we able to spark the love of football of all children? So again, relates to those player profiles at the start and creating that right balance, and relates to what I've just said of getting the balance between a technical session and a more fun session that we're looking at. Have we considered if an assistant coach is available, and how do we utilise them? How do we use the support in the assistant coach in developing the skill set process? Is the assistant coach able to take a smaller group, engage with others, support the learning of others, or able to work with a certain amount of players by asking them questions, looking at feedback? Is the assistant coach able to deliver the warm-up activity? Is the assistant coach going to take one team during the SSG or game at the end? Is the assistant coach going to pick up cones and move things whilst you're talking through or delivering part of the session? Are you delivering a 40-minute session? So if so, are you delivering a 10-minute block and then your assistant then is doing a 20-minute block and you're on the final 10? Or is your assistant looking at coaching interventions or managing players or supporting players in the process? There's so many ways you can utilise the assistant coach, and this is going to be another podcast episode which I'm going to look at. But this is just one consideration as I look into the considerations of creating a player-focused environment. Have we considered how to set up and pack up? So in terms of this, if we're setting up in a limited amount of time because we're on a shared astral turf where there's teams on before and after us, so we haven't got much time to set up or pack away, can we utilise the arrival activity to then set up and quickly set up for the planned session that we have? Or are players involved in packing away at the end of the session? For me, getting players to pick up cones to pack up the end of the session is part of my values, standards and disciplines. It's also what I want to instill within a player. So part of these learning outcomes, what values have I instilled within my coaching session? So as a player being committed, do they understand that they're doing it for the club? Are they picking up equipment because they know they're respectful towards the club and this is what the coach has to do? If the coach has to do it, can the player do it? For me, if I'm giving up time and if I can get to the session an hour early, then why can't a player get to a session 15 minutes early? Or if I've got to stay for an extra hour after the pack up, tidy up, why can't a player stay for an extra 5 minutes at the end just to pick up cones and put them away? Okay, parents may be in a rush and want to get out of it, but for me, you can use those 5 minutes at the end to get the players to pick everything up. Or you can get the players to pick up all the cones and then get them into feedback. This is a good way for them just to have a bit of fun, to run everything off at the end of the game, pick up all the cones and then come in for some dedicated feedback focus where you can realign their focus and get them understanding and asking those key questions and giving feedback. Have we considered pitch dimension, space, and is it appropriate for all the children? So is our space too big? Are there too many players for one small area? Are they getting enough touches in one area? Is there enough to allow them to explore and understand that pitch geography? Is there enough room to split up for two teams or two small groups? Or do we just have one area where we have to utilise and maximise our time within this small space? So can we use the assistant coach? Is the space beneficial to the session that we have? Or do we need to adapt our session there and then on the spot because we have less space, less equipment, less goals, less time, less players than we have available? And these are all key considerations to adapting on the spot. There are many times when I've needed to adapt. So for example, last week I was delivering a session on Monday evening with an under-9s group and I had planned to have goals within my session. As I went to grab one goal, the other coach from the other group said that I got these goals for my session this week. So automatically then I lost both the goals and I had no goals for my session. So I had to quickly think on my feet and adapt the session, knowing that I could do it without goals, and how I stimulated the practice to ensure that my learning outcomes were demonstrated there and then. So even though I didn't have goals, I could have still delivered the same session, but I just had to change the goal element of it, or whether I changed the session entirely, focused on one that didn't require goals. So that's a quick adaptation and some reflection there, but these are some of the key considerations and how we have to adapt on our feet there and then. So for example, have we prepared for any impacts upon the session such as weather, lack of space, lack of attendance, lack of equipment, no assistant coach? Is the session getting darker? All those kind of things that we have to consider when planning a session, how long we're planning it for, how much we're getting in there, how much contact time, how much we're impacting a player. Have we considered how much the players are going to understand and take away from the session? So for me, this is what I want to try and instill at the end of every session. What are the takeaway messages? What are players having for a takeaway that week? So are they going away thinking about their learning? Have they understood what the session outcomes were? Have they understood the session objectives? Have we provided or created a creative, engaging and fun environment where they can go away, learn and understand, taking away key messages from that session? Even if a session is just there for fun, there's always learning that could be captured. Or does a player going away knowing that that session was based entirely on fun? So if you've had a hard weekend, you've had a hard loss, and they're there on a Wednesday to train, and you've created that fun session, the takeaway message is that that was a fun session to align the group, to get the group back together, to try and raise spirits, to regroup and go again for next week. So that's the takeaway message for me at times. Takeaway message is that you've had fun tonight. Don't forget football is fun. Part of our fundamentals. You've had fun. You've come in with the group. You've blown off some steam. Go away now. Don't think about training this week anymore. And your takeaway message is football is fun. And sometimes, even though I said about allowing a player to learn and ask those key questions, at times when they're having their own tough week, especially from a young age, or that they're not enjoying their football as much because of some results, or training has been too tough for them, or they're not getting enough touches on the ball, for example, and this is upsetting them. In a child's head, this can be the worst thing in the world, or their environment of football isn't going the way they want it to. Because as a child, they're not thinking of a 10-session block like we are. So even though they may have only had 3 bad sessions out of 10, to them, they've had an experience where football has been bad for them for maybe a period of time. But for us, we know it's 3 sessions out of 10. But to a child, that 3 sessions could be a very long time. And therefore it could impact their want and return to learning, to that learning environment, or wanting to learn, or coming into training. So when they're going away and you're creating fun, and they've just gone, I had fun tonight, and that's all the coach wanted me to do, then that can be one of the biggest takeaway messages for any player, especially at a young age who's struggling, to go away and just to come back next week knowing that they've had lots of fun. Has the session been reflective of the previous game or contact? And have we recapped learning from the last training session to ensure those building blocks and transitions to ensure player understanding of ongoing sessions and objectives? So for me, quickly recap what happened in the last session, build on those building blocks, continue to develop player understanding, because sometimes I see coaches who will spend so much time planning and then it'll be delivered at one session. So for example, you could have a session planned on a low block, and a coach may focus everything on a low block within an hour and a half, and then the next week may do something completely different, which is completely attacking, where there's no defensive work. So okay, there may be transition between defence and attack, but he hasn't recapped anything from the week before. So the players have just forgotten what's happened, and then they're just moving into attacking, which for a lot of players, attacking and scoring goals and that creativity element is everything for them week in, week out. So then they forgot all about that defensive side. But if you have a quick recap, then it can ensure that they're building on the learning, building on what happened last week, creating more of a transition between week to week. Can we utilise players to give demonstrations and engage with other children in the session? So if there's opportunities to show what you want delivered, such as a rondo, can you get a player to help you deliver that rondo? Or if you want a player, if you're doing a passing exercise and you want to get a player passing 1-2, then you need him to overlap. Can you get the player to do that rather than you? So then the other players are seeing their peer do it. It's more relatable to them, and you're able to walk both the player through it as well as allowing those players to observe. So you're capturing those learning styles of kinesthetic, auditory and visual, as well as the fact that you're showing them a peer can do it, as well as using the player's quality, especially if you lack some of the technical side as a coach, to get that player doing it for you. Have you welcomed all the players and made them feel included within the session? So even though we can welcome players, they can disengage, or we don't engage with them enough within the session. So have we kept engaging them? Have we kept them stimulated? Have we kept their mind on track? If they're struggling in one point and part of the session isn't fun to them or isn't what football looks like, How do we go and make the start of the session fun for them? Or how do we make another part of that session fun to recapture their love during that session or that fun? At times we cannot make players feel welcomed. We want to say hello to each and every player. So for me, a standard practice for each coach is to fist bump every player at the start of every session. Hello, fist bump, how are you? Always ask those questions. How are you? How are you feeling? Are you okay? It's great to see you. Positive reassurance as they walk in. Always welcome. Just saying a hello can really brighten up a kid's day. But it's that kind of communication you need with each and every player. Hello, welcome into the coaching environment, and then suddenly they have that respect. For me, just capture that moment of welcoming them into a session, especially your new players. Have all the players left wanting more and having taken away enjoyment and key learning outcomes from that session. So do they want to go away and learn more? Do they want to come back next week? Do they want to push themselves? Do they want to ask questions? Have they enjoyed that session? Have they gone away and gone, I learned that this week, I learned this, this and this, or we done passing, but I know I need to drop my foot back to receive the ball, or I need to drop into a position to receive it to beat the defender when I'm out of possession to receive in possession. Or what do I understand about being in possession and being part of the build-up play within the midfield area? So there's so many questions that can be asked, and I'm talking from an under 11s point of view. Now, I've had my squad for 6 or 7 years, with some players being in the squad a lot longer. And we're a very good technical squad, and we're very good at understanding, but that's because I've been with them 6 or 7 years, and I've comprised my background of experience, my coaching standards, my philosophy, my expectations, my ideas, the support I have around me from my assistant coaches, and we've created a very good learning environment to allow players to ask questions and take a lot away. But then they will go and I can deliver these types of sessions to them. So I want them going away asking these questions or going away with these learning outcomes. Can we use players to help pack away at the end of the session? So as I said earlier on, can we get players to pack away, especially if we're on that pitch and we know we've got to get off in time for the group after us. So if players can help pack away, it's going to help us get off the pitch a bit quicker and to instill that environment where they know that they have to be involved within packing up and looking after the environment at the end of the session. What values and principles have we instilled in a session and why? So for example, if I can show commitment to the session by turning up early, then a player must too as well. A player must turn up early. A player must be able to give that commitment you're able to. So for example, I wouldn't expect my under 11 player to turn up an hour early. But if I can turn up an hour early, then they can turn up 10 minutes early, which for me is very good values to instill long term. Punctuality is a good one. And we always say, how can this relate to real life? And especially if they're lifelong participants of the game, they can have good punctuality to turn up the training in the long term, or that they're going to want to be training early. Or if they're help packing away, they're being aware of the coach's commitment and they're being aware of the environment. So part of our principles are we've involved players within the packing away and we've instilled that understanding of that they're looking after their club, they're looking after the equipment, they're supporting the coach. It's everyone's commitment, everyone's responsibility to pack away at the end of the session. It's not just we turn up the session, we leave it at the end and then the coach does the rest, because the coach has got so much going on in their lives and they're giving up that extra time to deliver coaching for the players. So if the players are packing up at the end, then they're supporting the coach and creating that two-way street. That two-way street is very important, especially for questioning and understanding, especially for players who have communication and feedback, and to create that discipline element when needed to know where the respect is and when they overstep the mark. Discipline. What are our discipline strategies and how do we manage and deal with disruptive behaviour? We're talking about grassroots football, and I don't really like to mention discipline or behaviour too much because it can come across quite negative. And they're not really words we should associate when coming to football, especially when we talk about fun and the word football. Football's there to provide fitness, health and well-being, enjoyment, to play football. Do we consider discipline now? Some coaches don't, and this is why learning becomes disrupted. This is why we lose players. This is why sessions don't run to the standards we want them to, or there's not enough progression. Are you ready to be adaptable? So we've covered this a bit earlier on. So I'm not going to dwell into that too much more. What playing surface is training being delivered on? Will this impact players' control, for example? How how are the players aware that this impacts them? So, are we on grass? Are we on sand? Are we on 3G? Are we on concrete? Are we in futsal? Are we on a hard surface floor within a sports hall, for example? Is the floor more spongy or bouncy on the Astro? So this can really impact a passing session, because if you're on the grass and you want a ball played along the floor and it's rained the night before, then the ball is going to move slower and it's going to be held up because of the water sitting within the pitch. Whereas on 3G, if we want to transfer the ball from one side to the other, then the ball's going to travel a lot quicker. So then that interlinks with space as well. So if we're looking at a passing exercise, when we're looking at transition from the final third to the midfield third, and we're looking at switching play, then if we're looking at a small space, can we switch play effectively, whether we want to switch it from one side to the other? Or if the space is too big, will a player struggle to get it from one side to the other? So that's about understanding our players, and even the service can impact our type of session. Have we identified the players who are listening, those who are disengaged, and how do we overcome this? So, for example, thinking back to what I said earlier on, if you've got a group there and you're looking around at players and you're trying to assess how much they're taking in and understand when players are disengaged or those who are not listening. Understand, even if you keep talking, they're not taking much away. And even if they've not taken much away, how can we then push them or engage them within the session at other points so that they're able to learn from what they weren't listening to whilst you were giving terminal feedback, for example. So there's a key example of coaching terminology, terminal feedback. So terminal feedback is when you stop a session or you have all the group in and you're giving them feedback there and then. Can we get players to lead on parts of the sessions? Can we get them involved, providing them with roles which interlinks with those values and principles, such as leadership, confidence, communication, peer support, etc. So for me, at part of my club, within my team, we have a player coach, and I took this idea from Jose Mourinho when he went to Chelsea. Having a player who's part of the coaching team to provide that peer support and to engage the players, who was an extension of the coaching team. So for me, having a player coach at my under 11s develops that leadership, that confidence, that communication, that organisation, supports their peers, who comes in and sets up the warm-up in terms of the dynamic stretching or dynamic movements that we're going to be doing. Or he gets a team in a rondo, or he gets a team just to do a couple of laps together. Even though I'm not a huge fan of laps, he may just go, okay, the coaches are over there, I'm just going to get the team in and get us warming up. And as a kid, sometimes you may just go, okay, a lap, and get your team doing that. And there's nothing wrong with that, because as a kid, that's what they thought of. So then it becomes player-led learning. And they've organised this between themselves. And they've used their initiative to get the group in, and they've taken them on a lap. So there's nothing wrong with that, especially if that's what they want to do. And again, creates those challenges, because you may have players who want to be quicker than each other, or players may have a bit of competition, but we must be mindful of the fact that there will be players who will fall behind and will struggle, for example. How long have we planned a session for? Is the session long enough or too short? Are there transitions? Is there an SSG? So I've covered part of this element earlier on within this episode, but we have to be mindful of the fact how long we have contact time with players for, and for some players, sessions can seem a very long time if they're not enjoying it or taking much away. Again, what coaching terminology have we used, and do players understand it? Have we supported them in understanding it? If players aren't performing to their usual standards, our expected standards, or are struggling, have we considered why? Are we trying to push a player too much when it's been such a long day in school for them, or that they've not had a great day in school, or that they're just not engaged and just wanting to have a bit of fun, or that they're tired, or they've just had tea, or that they've come home from school, they then had tea, then they're out for football, so they're feeling a bit overwhelmed. So we need to understand all these considerations, especially from a young age, and that the fact we may need to adapt there and then for the session, or if the player's not performing whilst the others who we're trying to push and get that balance right, as I mentioned, then we need to understand why that player is performing and why. Can we utilise the assistant coach to engage them? Can we take a bit off them and give them a bit of leniency in this session? As much as we have our own high standards, sometimes we need to just be aware of the players that we have and how we support them and create that nurturing environment. Nurturing for me is key, but we mustn't do too much of it, because then we'll drop resilience. There'll be players who won't know how to problem solve, and they'll become too dependent on that nurturing, kind environment, when realistically football and the world is such a harsh place, and football is all about resilience, confidence, leadership, and at times hard tackles. So then that builds into our key principles and values. The time of day, time of week, issues away from football, home or school could be affecting players. So again, if a player's been in school all day, then you have a session at 6 o'clock at night, they may be tired and they've gone home at some point and then they've just relaxed for a bit and now they've had to come back out. For some players, that's great and works for them. For other players, going back out on the back of a long day just doesn't work and doesn't impact them. Who are our leaders in the session? Can we get them involved? So this interlinks with those player roles, how we organise sessions, what responsibilities are we given. Can we get them involved, or at times can they overpower a session? So if we have too many leaders and they have such big personalities, can this hamper player learning? Can they ask too many questions at times when you're trying to give feedback? Are they the most technical players, so then taking ball contact time away from our lesser technical players? So this is some of the key considerations that we need to ask, and why. Can we put constraints on players? So in terms of giving them constraints, at times this may seem negative, but for us it can be a challenging opportunity to really test those players and to see what they have and how they problem solve, how they overcome issues, how then we can push them in areas that they're excelling in to try and excel even more. Or if they're excelling in one area and they're lacking in another, can we put a constraint on so that we're trying to stimulate their learning in the area that they're struggling? So, but even if we are putting on constraints, can we create a guided blending learning strategy so this can be seen as a challenge to a player? Because sometimes if you put a constraint on a player, at times I've found that this can limit them, this can make them unhappy, it can frustrate them, and then sometimes a session will flip on its head and become negative really quickly. But it's all about how you support the player within that process. And if you're showing it to be a challenge and it's guided, blended learning, then it's not going to seem so much as a constraint. And it's going to seem more as a challenge and more of a push and more of a way to try and enjoy it, even though they are limited. So for example, last Saturday I delivered a session where the players weren't allowed to run with the ball. And that's because in the SSG. So we transitioned from the technical part of the session, which was focused around passing and build-up play with combinations. I wanted to see the transition into the SSG. So automatically I challenged my players into 2 touches, but I conditioned it that they couldn't run with the ball. Now this frustrated players who are creative, who like to run with the ball, who love to take on one-on-ones, who like to try and get from one end to another, who like to try and beat players and then try and score. But the transition and the learning outcome met my objectives and what I expected from that session. So even though the players were limited and they had that constraint that they couldn't run with the ball, so it forced them to release, run on, to receive, the build-up play, those combinations, their pitch geography, their movement in and out of possession, their spatial awareness, their passing awareness, the type of passing, how the passing could open up the game, what type of passes did they need, where they needed to be in position. All of this learning was instilled within that transition because of the constraint I put on. And it created that blended learning and showed players that they could do all of that and how they had to transition from attacking into defending. How are we going to progress or regress a session? So even though there are plenty of progressions in a session, don't be afraid to regress it. Don't be afraid to try and work backwards, because a regression can really work and support that player learning, especially for lesser technical players, which are really important. A regression comes across negative at times, but a regression can be really beneficial for those who are lesser technical and for those who are struggling just to get back to basics. So there's nothing wrong with a regression, and I'm very supportive of the fact that when we progress, we can also regress. So we can also balance this out in sessions. Even though this first episode's gone for about an hour, just for considerations for creating a player-focused environment, there's many key questions and support just to highlight in the planning stages for each and every session. As I focus more on the podcast series and I look at other areas, this is going to be really important, and asking these questions in the build-up into each session, as well as reflection in preparation for the session ahead. I hope you've enjoyed episode 1, and as I continue to reflect on my coaching journey, as well as to give advice into the coaching world and try and create that environment for stimulated learning, I'm very thankful of your time to listen to this episode. You can find me on YouTube and Twitter, as well as LinkedIn, Coach Luca, the Reflective Coach, and this is the Reflective Coach Podcast. I look forward to seeing and hearing from you all soon. Good luck in your coaching journey, and I can't wait to deliver more episodes to you. Take care and stay safe.